Welcome back to the 411 on Tech. This week we are reviewing the MacBook Pro M1 Max 16-inch. We've had a while to review it now. We've been using it to edit videos for the past month and a half. These new MacBook Pros launched a huge fanfare and accolades, touting them as truly next level. In this video we'll see if that's true, and we're going to get into it right after this.
So let's kick it off with design. I'm actually really digging the design. You still have the all aluminum body, which I like, and it really gives it that Apple premium look that we've grown so accustomed to. The edges are all round and smooth, and there are no sharp, harsh lines like some previous models. When I first saw it revealed at Apple's press conference, I immediately thought about how much it looked like my last MacBook, which is this guy here. Yes, it's been a minute since I've had a MacBook, but this guy was my tried and true MacBook from all the way back in 2007, and it's since been retired, but I loved it and it got me through college. Apple decided to go back to that thick design with these new MacBook Pros, favoring functionality over a more compact tapered design, and I think that's great. But let me tell you, this guy is chunky. It's slightly thicker than recent generations, but comes in at 4.8 pounds. So it's definitely not light, but that extra weight is just more to love because the ports are back. Like I mentioned, it's been a minute since I've had a MacBook, but I think we all remember, we'll call them dongle wars, where people had to have like 5 dongles just to get all the ports they needed on their MacBook Pros. So now you have 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, the SD card reader is back, which supports SD-XC cards up to UHS 2, a 3.5mm headphone jack, an HDMI 2.0 port, and my favorite addition that yet again takes me back to my 2007 MacBook glory days is the MagSafe port for charging. If only they brought back the light up Apple logo. On the bottom you have what we both think is a really nice touch, especially after you paid all this money. You have an engraved MacBook Pro. What I don't like though is the feet. I can't believe we spent all this money and I can't even get rubber feet. They're just hard plastic and it slides all over the place, especially when you try to open it. So you have to kind of hold the back of it while you lift the screen. It sounds like a small complaint, but to me it's a big deal. I guess rubber feet aren't premium enough for Apple anymore, but I digress. Let's go back to what I do like, that beautiful 16.2-inch mini LED display. We'll talk more about the display when we talk about the specs of this big boy, but the display is really nice. The bezels at the top are round and they're smaller too at 3.5 millimeters.
Then on that display, you now have the notch. Much has been said about the notch. The only time I really notice it is when I'm on the desktop. When watching programs or putting an app in full screen mode, the notch disappears. I know at launch that if you have multiple apps open at the same time that some of the information was getting hidden behind a notch. Apple will most likely resolve those issues going forward. Also, the notch is not like some kind of brick wall that your mouse cursor hits. The mouse cursor just goes right through it. If the notch really bothers you, you can use a dark wallpaper to hide the notch, and there's also programs that turn the top of your wallpaper and the menu bar black to match the notch. On another note, in what seems like a missed opportunity, or maybe Apple saving it for the next model, there's no Face ID tech included in the notch. Michelle and I were really looking forward to the touch bar. However, that is gone with these new MacBook Pros. You once more have physical function keys. Some apps were better optimized for the touch bar than others. There were also reports that the touch bar would freeze and the only way to fix it was a reboot. The touch bar looks cool, but if that was troublesome like that, it's not going to be worth it. These are, after all, pro machines, and as they say, time is money. You don't want to have to waste time troubleshooting issues like that. Moving on to the keyboard. You have black keys over top a black keyboard bed. The keys are backlit and they are scissor switches. Apple has moved away from the troublesome butterfly keyboard. We haven't had this MacBook long enough, so we'll have to see how well the keyboard holds up. In our experience, typing on the keys has been good. Moving below the keyboard is the trackpad. Apple has really perfected this trackpad. The haptic feedback you get confirming presses feels like you're actually pressing it. The trackpad is large and supports multi-finger gestures.
Moving on to specs. For our build here, since we wanted this to be a second video editing machine, we went with the 16-inch MacBook Pro M1 Max with the 10-core CPU, 32-core GPU, and opted for the 64 gigabytes of unified memory. And with the M1 Max, you get double the memory bandwidth, which is 400 gigabytes per second versus only 200 gigabytes per second you get with the M1 Pro chip. We also decided to bump up the storage from 1 terabyte to a 2 terabyte SSD, since we will be storing a bunch of photos and 4K videos for our YouTube videos locally before we transfer them over to our Synology. Now let's talk more about the specs of that gorgeous display. It's a 16.2-inch Liquid Retina XDR mini LED display. It's not an OLED, but it's pretty close, thanks to a large number of individual LED backlights, which allow for deeper blacks, improved contrast ratio, and a brighter panel. You get up to 1000 nits of sustained brightness and 1600 nits peak brightness with a contrast ratio of 1,000,000 to 1, which should make for a great color accuracy while video editing and some nice HDR content watching. For most tasks though, the brightness will be maxed out at 500 nits, which was the max brightness of the previous MacBook Pro. The resolution of the display is 3456 by 2234, and the aspect ratio is 16 by 10.
As Michelle mentioned, our M1 Max comes with 10 cores. The breakdown is 8 high-performance cores and 2 efficiency cores. The M1 architecture is a system on a chip. So all the components are on a single chip. Those being the CPU, GPU, the high bandwidth memory, and so on are all on the same chip. Also on the chip are a slew of accelerators and coprocessors, such as an encode and decode engines. There are 2 video encoder engines, hardware acceleration for H.264 and HVEC, a video decode engine, and 2 ProRes encode and decode engines. And all of them have access to the high bandwidth memory that Michelle talked about. All these components being tightly integrated on the same chip equals truly stunning performance.
There are a few standout features that we really like about the new MacBook Pros. For one, it's still nice to have a 3.5mm headphone jack, and it supports high impedance headphones. For all you audiophiles out there, it features DC load detection and adaptive voltage output, which is nice. It can detect the impedance of the headphones you connect to the MacBook Pro and will adapt its output for low and high impedance headphones. It also has a built-in hardware DAC that can convert digital audio up to 96 kHz to analog audio. So this will be really nice for listening to high fidelity audio. Touch ID is not a new feature to this year's MacBook Pro, but is another feature we like, having the Touch ID built into the power button to securely unlock the Mac. It does have a new tactile ring on the button that makes it easier and faster to find.
Having the Touch ID is very nice indeed. A real standout feature with these MacBook Pros are the displays. You get a mini LED here. So you're getting almost OLED levels of black here. There is also very little blooming when you have bright objects displayed on dark backgrounds. It's a real shame that we use this MacBook Pro in dock mode mostly because the display is very good for video editing and for watching content. The display also features Apple's ProMotion tech, where the display adapts from 24 Hz all the way up to 120 Hz. So for apps that take advantage of this, you'll get super smooth scrolling and or gameplay. Also, macOS takes advantage of this, so switching between screens and moving windows around is super smooth. Hopefully more and more apps will take advantage of the 120 Hz refresh rate. Moving up to the top of the screen, the webcam is improved. It's now rocking a 1080p webcam, which is improved from the previous 720p webcam. In this world of Zoom and FaceTime calls, having a good webcam is key. However, there isn't support for center stage here, which would have been nice. So if you want to get up and move around a little during the video calls, it's not going to follow you. Also housed in the notch is an ambient light sensor that automatically adjusts the backlight intensity of the keys and adapts to screen brightness. With the 16-inch M1 Max, like we have, there's a high power mode. This theoretically should give the M1 Max even more performance in processor-intensive workflows. With the M1 Max having 32 GPU cores, we wanted to see what the difference might be. In our testing and rendering videos in DaVinci Resolve, we really didn't notice any difference.
Okay, so moving on to the best part, performance. As we mentioned earlier, we got this MacBook Pro for video editing. So on the performance side of things, that is what we're most interested in. And let me tell you, this thing is a performance beast. We currently edit on a PC that has a 5900X AMD CPU, which has 12 cores, 24 threads, and an NVIDIA 3080 GPU. And I don't think either one of us ever dreamed that a laptop could offer us similar performance for video editing, but it does. When editing, we can smoothly scrub through the timeline at 4K with no issues whatsoever. Effects render quick, but still not instantaneous. We couldn't wait to test out export times to see how they would compare against our PC video editing rig. We tested out 2 of our most recent videos and exported them on both the MacBook Pro and PC in DaVinci Resolve. Both had multiple streams of 4K H.264 video footage stacked, and they both had some effects added. One of the videos was about 23 minutes and had color grading. That video was rendered and exported on the PC in 6 minutes and 26 seconds. That same video was then rendered and exported on the MacBook Pro M1 Max in 6 minutes and 11 seconds, beating out the PC by 15 seconds. Then we did a 16-minute video. On the PC, it rendered and exported in 3 minutes and 57 seconds, and the Mac did it in 4 minutes and 9 seconds, with the PC beating out the Mac by only 12 seconds. Now, this isn't a big difference, right? And yes, the MacBook Pro is slightly more expensive than our PC, but the fact that this portable laptop can go head-to-head with a desktop PC with those specs with a dedicated GPU is very, very impressive. And it's nice to know that if we need to edit on the go, which we've already had to do, this thing is more than capable to do it and just as quick as our desktop PC. We also ran a couple of benchmarks as well, which you can see here. So this has really been a great machine for video editing and productivity. But what about gaming? Now, if you're only concerned about gaming, we would definitely not recommend buying this, and I'm sure most of you already know that supported games on Mac are limited. Just scrolling through a Steam library, there were only a handful of games that were compatible, and they were pretty old or just indie type games that aren't very graphically intensive. Now, you can obviously play your Apple Arcade games on here if you're into that. And if you're into cloud gaming and have a good internet connection, you can stream games from services like Xbox Cloud Gaming or NVIDIA GeForce Now. You can also run Windows with Parallels and try some gaming that way, but from what we've heard, the experience isn't great. We did run a couple of gaming benchmarks, and we will go ahead and put those up now. So there is potential here for gaming, but again, the number of supported games is limited, and in Apple's defense, the MacBook Pro wasn't built to be a gaming laptop, but maybe one day.
Very impressive performance indeed. Speaking of impressives, are the speakers on the MacBook Pro. You get 6 speakers here and they sound incredible. We listened to Dua Lipa's Levitating and it sounded great. We also watched some of the Marvel movies, and again, it was a delightful viewing and listening experience. There was plenty of bass on hand on both media types. The MacBook Pro also supports spatial audio on Dolby Atmos videos and head tracking with some AirPods. Battery life was another standout feature on this MacBook Pro. Apple claims 21 hours of video playback. However, no one is going to buy a machine this expensive just to watch 21 hours of video. We have been managing to edit video on battery for 3 to 4 hours, web surf, and watch some video content and still have battery left. We also did a test where we played a 4K HDR video for 2 hours where the screen got really bright playing this content and the battery decreased 20%. For charging, we see the return of MagSafe, as Michelle had mentioned. They are calling it MagSafe 3 this time around. And as you know, I love magnets. With the MagSafe braided power cable, It will detach from the MacBook if someone trips over the cable, so your expensive MacBook won't go flying off onto the floor. This 16-inch M1 Max supports fast charging. With the 140 watt power brick included, you can get 50% power in just 30 minutes. You can also charge the MacBook Pro via the Thunderbolt ports. So if you just want to have one cable, you can charge it that way as well. So between the outstanding battery life and the fast charging, having a powered up MacBook Pro should never be a problem. Now we're going to move on to our final thoughts. So for me, it's a very expensive machine.
Yes.
And we're just, like, especially if we have the 64 gigs of the unified memory, we're just not fully utilizing it, but I'm hoping that as the channel grows, as we do more video editing intensive things, that we're gonna grow into it.
Yeah.
But it's definitely nice to have it than not have it, and also just being able to do stuff on the go and not having to oh well, we're not home, we can't render video, in a timely fashion. So it's been pretty nice, and I'm excited to see what else we can get accomplished with this. And like I said, we're getting into Final Cut Pro. And that's on a Mac, and having a second video editing machine is going to help us increase productivity for the channel. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. It's been really awesome for video editing, and it's just been so impressive. You hear about the specs, and yes, it sounds great, but to see it in action and that it does come close to, or sometimes beats, our PC rig, with a dedicated GPU and everything, it's really awesome. And like I said, we already had experiences. We've had to edit on the go. We can do that with no problem whatsoever, and it still exports quickly. The display looks beautiful. I mean, we're mostly using it in dock mode, but even the keyboard experience is really nice. The trackpad, I know some of you might be used to recent Macs, but the haptics, you're not actually clicking.
Yeah, but it feels
it's really cool.
Feels so good.
And it's awesome because, I've had other laptop trackpads that end up, breaking, the ones that have buttons and stuff. You don't have to worry about that, and so it's really nice. It's gorgeous, and I mean, we've just been loving it. But again, it is pricey. But if you're using it for these pro level type things like video editing or 3D modeling and stuff like that, it's really great.
But even this one is really overkill for our use right now. So if you're into video editing or any kind of coding or anything, maybe the M1 Pro, at that cheaper price point, it's $1,000 or $2,000,
or even the 14-inch model if you don't want. I mean, we wanted a bigger screen because again, when we're editing on the go, you want. I
like the bigger screen. Some people prefer the smaller for more portability, but we like the bigger screen for editing. And you're one gripe about the feet, so they may be a hard rubber, or maybe they're not rubber, I don't know, but I think Apple went with that because a porous, grippier rubber may wear quicker, so I think that's maybe what they were, but it's definitely,
you try to open it and it just,
definitely,
it's a little annoying.
It slides across. I like the premium build, so I'm hoping we're going to get, maybe 5 years of use out of this or something before we need to upgrade. So, you can even do 8K stuff, added that on here. So it's pretty good. It's definitely an investment, but definitely if you don't have the use case for it, I would not spend the money on it. And if you're looking to do any kind of serious gaming, also not here, because now you can't do boot camp anymore because they're on their own Apple Silicon. So I think that's going to do it for this one, guys. Please remember to subscribe, comment, and like this video. And we're going to see you guys in the next one. Don't forget about the giveaway. It's coming up pretty soon on January 11th. And see you guys in the next one. Bye.